Purpose. What is the purpose? Universal House of Prayer is our growth of the advocacy and ministry stuff that was started with radio advocacy, which is sort of an outgrowth of JFA Social Services. JFA Social Services never really started up in North Carolina. So the purpose here is when people come for help, you help them. Again, restated is that it's a lot of it is basic help, just reading a letter, helping with an application, and so forth. Not complicated stuff, but having to navigate what society services are and pointing people to the services and helping them to access those services and uplifting them in the process. Now, nothing is ever charged for. So the purpose here with this investigation was to go ahead and address issues that led to and are a part of a wrongful termination. The individual in this scenario is Orlando J. McClain, and it also addresses safety issues at a predominant center right smack in the middle of downtown Raleigh, the capital of North Carolina. So when you have dangerous conditions in the community, in the city, and people are being injured, not just employees, but also residents and guests or whatever you want to call them, it's imperative to go ahead and say, hey, look, can we spotlight this and change it, please? So the purpose is to get some sort of change. Also, it continues what was started with open and competitive hiring. And we believe this wrongful termination is a primary example of what happens when you don't have open and competitive hiring. When you have scenarios where a dominant race takes over an employment workplace and they run it as they feel like and that's regardless of policies and procedures that are in place to go ahead and have a productive workplace environment that is conducive to executing services on the behalf of the government. And government employees going astray, basically. So the purpose is to shine a spotlight on that stuff. Okay, when you weighing data, especially interviews, affidavit, testimonials, whatever you want to call them, accounts, and so forth. Especially trained individuals are always weighed higher than your everyday folk because you're using a professional standard there. So your doctors, your lawyers, police officers, all those people who have special advanced training and degrees tend to be weighed on the higher side in terms of any analysis. I mean, that's why you go to trials and all of a sudden you have professional testimony by so-and-so. Why? Because they have degrees and so forth. I have a master's degree, for example. My word should be taken a little bit higher than your regular everyday person because I went to school, got my degree, specialized training, so forth. Police officer also, they go through vigorous training and protocol. So in this scenario, you have one officer who, JT, who was present during the incident. Now, when you're doing an analysis of what transpired, now I'm looking at the data just as if it was presented to me right now. This officer was at the front desk when an incident with Orlando J. McClain occurred that led to his termination. Now, it's interesting because I thought this officer wasn't present, maybe was making rounds, wasn't anywhere near the front desk, but apparently this officer was right there at the front desk. And what's interesting is that this officer portrays the incident as not a big deal as quote unquote as the ladies make it out to be. So her professional training was that, hey, look, wasn't a big deal what transpired, and the ladies, quote unquote, are taking it out of perspective. That's interesting because it shows that there's a gender issue over at the shelter. The ladies taking things out of context. So it's like, most of her affidavit, which is being presented, is that, hey, look, I don't remember. Now, this is interesting. When you have a law enforcement people, from what I've seen and know of, is they take notes, especially when they're on duty. They have detailed notes of what transpired and have a log of what typically they do. And they usually pay attention. Now, if an incident is occurring a few feet from you, and you didn't intervene, you have to look at why you didn't intervene. Now, there has been allegations that law enforcement has been instructed by a supervisor named Candice Brown to go ahead and not intervene in the day-to-day functions that they were assigned, that law enforcement was assigned to intervene and patrol and ensure safety. So if a supervisor is telling some law enforcement entity and individual not to intervene when things happen, then this may sort of shed a light as to why this officer did not intervene. She reports that, I can't remember what happened. Interesting. She was a few feet from it. She did not intervene in the interaction between Orlando J. McLean and a guest. And so it's like, and she was obligated on duty to intervene if something was transpiring. So if a supervisor is telling people don't intervene and don't involve yourself in things, then this adds to that credence, because this law enforcement officer's affidavit shows that she was there and did nothing. And I'm just hoping she wasn't just on the phone or something like that. Okay, affidavit number 2 is by Mr. Davis. Now, Mr. Davis is the only one that has a report on file for everything that transpired on the day of the incident that allegedly led to the termination of Orlando McLean. So, one witness which seems to have been paying attention is Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, though, it's interesting that he is clear in that the guest was irate and loud. And the back and forth, when you consider all the other information that was obtained, back and forth seems to be the attempts made by Orlando to calm the guest down. Now, in this affidavit, though, it says that third shift supervisor had to intervene, but the other answer to questions was it wasn't a physical intervention, and it wasn't that Orlando was threatening the guest physically or verbally. So based on this report and this affidavit, some of the conclusions that can be reached is that the supervisor intervention took place. It was a verbal intervention, though. It wasn't a physical intervention, which seems to be at odds with what was being reported. The other thing is that you just have an environment wherein law enforcement is present and a guest is irate, but no call for help was made by a third shift supervisor. So is this an environment wherein the women, I don't know if you guys, the way black women treat black men is not the same way white women treat white men, or Hispanic women treat Hispanic men. The quote unquote ladies may be a little bit more harsh, I would say. And I'm not sure if the third shift supervisor's actions just reflect the fact that it was a more of a hands-on approach that she has established. There are allegations that this third shift supervisor is threatening guests and so forth. I'm not sure if this report would tend to support that, because I would have thought that she would have just left it to the law given a threat was made. And if she didn't leave it to the law, based on what this account says, she intervened. Does that go more towards to what's being reported is that law enforcement is being routinely told to hold back? Either way, the weight of Mr. Davis's reports is higher, in that I know we had a law enforcement report, which is way pretty high, but here this guy actually paid attention. Seems like he was looking at what was happening and what was transpiring. And from what he saw, it was a verbal intervention by a third shift supervisor and no call for help, even though help was right there at the desk. So there's also this sort of adds to the claim that there was nothing really happened, which not just the law enforcement person articulated, but Orlando, like, nothing really happened. Hey, there wasn't even an incident, supposedly. So if law enforcement says nothing really happened, Orlando says nothing really happened, but then Candice says, oh, this was a really bad event. You were out of place. You were threatening employee. It just, stuff doesn't jive. It doesn't go together. I hope you guys can see that everything should have come to play. But either way, this is the only one account, a reporter, that says there was a threat made. So I'm hoping that you guys take that into mind. So, one of the last professional affidavits. I term it professional affidavit for a reason, because if you've been trained and been working there, you're a professional, okay? This is the lowest level professional, because it doesn't seem like this person is very apt at answering questions at length. So when you look at abilities to be credible witnesses and document what you see and transpiring during your shift, this is one of those that seem to be one of the least detail-oriented answers that were received. So this person clearly says that Orlando did not threaten verbally or physically the guest. And here also is a controversy, is that it doesn't say that Candice Brown intervened. And this person reports that he was present during the incident in question. So he doesn't report that there was an intervention at all by Supervisor Candice Brown. So that's interesting. Whether physically or verbally, there was no intervention by Candice Brown. So, and this is one of the only affidavits that answers that they have been threatened at the shelter by guests verbally. There's another interesting concept in that it was a routine basis that these people, they came in high and drunk and they would always threaten whatever. So the majority of these affidavits that it's a safe environment, that's clear from what their perspectives are. This one here, though, says, yes, I've been verbally threatened, but don't report it. So you have a reporting problem also, because if they are threatened verbally, it will not make it to the next shift, so to speak. Any verbal threats would die therein. So based on what the feedback is from this person. Interesting concept. I mean, you are a trained professional, and it seems like there needs training up, because when you are asked for an affidavit and given ample spaces to comment on, none of it was used. It was just a yes or no answer that was received, and no details. So that tells me that something is very interesting about the level of reporting requirements that they have, and what information, do they actually get detailed reports about what's transpiring from shift to shift? I know we used to have detailed reports. I'm not sure if that currently is the case anymore. Just an interesting takeaway here. It's just, again, this report is only weighed at 20%. Your 20% is based on the amount of detail level, and also just, although he's a professional, there was no other reports submitted officially through official channels on databases and so forth, to my knowledge, upon information and belief. So it just questions about how much is happening at the shelter that doesn't get reported. And is there a push not to report stuff, as is being alleged? So if that is the case, then that's very bad, because then when something happens of magnitude, you won't have a paper trail to support, or you won't even have proper interventions to avoid a bad incident from happening, because all this stuff gets unreported along the way. So when it all gets unreported along the way, you are setting the stage for something worse to happen, and it will not be properly responded to, because there was no warning to come with it. So, and then all of a sudden later on, oh yeah, we knew that was happening. Oh yeah, whatever. Hope this report helps. One more report that's being submitted and analyzed. What is an example of a vague report? Let's say an incident occurs, and you go back and ask people to complete a statement of what they saw and transpired. Now, first of all, why are you asking for a statement? I would think you would go ahead and ask for an incident report if something transpired that would lead to the firing of a person. But let's say all that is said and done, and you get this response. Second shift supervisor requested that he would like to know what I observed last night with regards to Orlando and guests. Guests entered the facility, and OJ only mentioned that he thought he would be returning at 4 a.m. Now here you don't have no clue as when this guest returned, and actually when he left. Guest said, I went to the hospital. Which hospital? What did the guest mention? What hospital? Or is it assumed to be a certain hospital? And how long was the guest there? No indication of that is in this statement. OJ said that I thought how you was at work. Okay, so apparently a worker thought that the guest left to work. So when did the guest actually leave to go to work, since apparently OJ actually observed the guest leaving? No time frames, no time stamps here. That's what I'm saying. No details. Guests cut an attitude, and they began to go back and forth because the boss sent guests home early, because 2 men had already shown up. So apparently this guest got sent home because 2 men showed up. Okay, what is going back and forth? What does that mean? What does fussing mean? words count when you are describing an incident, because words are weighed in terms of threat level. So this going back and forth or fussing is not sufficient to establish anything. OJ told guests, please don't get an attitude with me because he sent you home early. What does that mean, cut an attitude? Is that the issuance of a threat? I mean, what does that mean? And when I see something like that, I'm telling the truth. I would ask for I would think you have a specific incident report form and log it into the system. Even if it gets logged in late, it would be logged into the system. Again, you have a professional standard here. I mean, that's the thing. You have to apply the right standard in a situation like that. Not a reasonable person standard, but a professional standard. That's it. What in your professional capacity do you expect of employees when a guest becomes irate or is fussing back and forth? And you can't tell from this last submission anything. I mean, you don't have dates, times, any indication of how much time was spent fussing back. Was it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour and a half? Who knows? So that is also the appropriate level if there's a law enforcement officer around or other supervisor to know when to end. You can't let something like that just keep going on at the front desk if something like that is going on at the front desk. So a report like this would not be sufficient to establish anything. It doesn't have enough information about who else was around, and so forth. So this wouldn't be sufficient for me as a professional to go ahead and accept a report like that. I would ask for more information. I would just give them a form and say, hey, look, you need to do an incident report so I can file it in the system, or do an incident report and you file it in the system. One or the other, let it be entered into the system that something actually occurred. But then you also go to the fact that some employees didn't think anything happened, transpired, nothing of substance transpired. So is a report like this actually speaking to the issue of the hostility level is so heightened over there that certain things that other people would consider abnormal are normal at the shelter? Just trying to see if this helps you out, guys. What are some of the conclusions? Some of the conclusions are that county attorney does absolutely nothing while conditions worsen at South Penitentiary Center. Lorena McDowell also failed to investigate that she's a top administrator in that department and has oversight over the South Penitentiary Center. David Harris also. And David Harris more so is a policy person. He needs to go ahead and make sure these policies are using the right standard, a professional standard versus a reasonable personal standards. Don't know really for sure if it was him or whoever actually, I believe it was, whoever actually wrote these policies, need to use professional standards at the appropriate time and reasonable personal standards at the appropriate time too. Angela Crawford also failed to investigate. Here's the meat and crust of this. The evidence shows that the tendency and propensity is that this wasn't a severe incident, number one. So that's a conclusion. It wasn't a severe incident, number one. That's based on the feedback from those involved who did participate. Number two, that the resident never filed a complaint, so you don't have him available and around as a witness. So that conclusion goes to the fact that, hey, look, you need to have everybody available and accountable in this matter, available as witnesses. But then Mr. Orlando went to a meeting with a supervisor. First of all, it was way later than the incident, so he was allowed to keep on working if he was a threat. That's so unusual and so inappropriate, number one. So unusual, number two, is that, first of all, when the incident was occurring, that no incident reports were done. So you have the lower barrier that creates more of a threat to employees, but then you have failing to document. That's also against county policy. And then even if you document, you got to make sure your documentation is accurate. So if you're falsely accusing someone and saying, hey, I had to physically stop you from hurting this dude, or and it wasn't the case, nowhere in any of the reports is that a conclusion, then that's a problem. And number three is that if you are above that person, Candice Brown, and you're the next level in investigative process, you receive emails that you ask for weeks later from employees who are present to give an account of what has transpired, and then you withhold that as you going around telling people, hey, look, I believe these reports are false. That's why I'm not surrendering them. You can't just willfully withhold stuff and be in your position. That doesn't make sense. So one conclusion is that you have aided and abetting here of the falsification of a report as evidenced by going around, as Mr. Frank Lawrence has been reported to be doing. I'm telling people I'm withholding the evidence and or just outright withholding and not providing it even after the first meeting with David Havers, wherein evidence was requested. No one's surrendered it. So it's like, okay, you have two supervisory level people here who just are totally engaging in criminal actions, number one, and or against basic policy that's outlined in county policies. Lastly, you have, even after the affidavits were sent out. Okay, these affidavits were sent out, and then Mr. Frank Lawrence and Mr. Candice Brown, especially, they go up to Mr. Morris and say, hey, look, we don't want you to go ahead and complete this affidavit. We're encouraging you not to. I would have preferred that you said nothing, than to go around and then it gets around to whatever transpires over there. Oh my gosh, it's incredible how quickly when something happens over there that it circulates. And so when you go ahead and do actions like that and say, hey, look, we don't want you, and then you have a case manager like Julie going around and saying, we don't want you to complete an affidavit, then you're obstructing and you're violating county policy, especially after Tanika told Orlando, no, you won't need evidence when you go into this meeting with Miss Lorena. It's just unfair. It's totally against county policy. And county policy says you have to give person evidence and 5 business days to meet with the department head. That never transpired. It went way over 5 business days. And you're failing to give them in a timely manner 6,000 E's, 6,000 F forms. It's just, you're not abiding by timelines. And then if you see the quality of these a memo that doesn't even have a signature, a memo that doesn't have the name, it's just, I thought a Mickey Mouse wrote a memo when I saw the memo from the department head. And it's just crazy because this dude, Orlando, is waiting for several days now for a hearing to transpire and has no word with reference to when that hearing. And the thing is, it was so bad. I feel sorry for the dude that, he went and got blindsided by the first meeting with David Harris. No evidence, and although he kept requesting it. Then he goes to the second meeting wherein he relies on the word of Tanika, and oh yeah, you won't need, and then in the results from that, in the memo, it says you failed to present anything to change the outcomes. But Lorena knew he didn't have the evidence, or should have known. So all this shows a pattern of just going against county policy. But then it just goes back to reinforce this one basic issue. When you don't have open and competitive hiring, okay, you can go ahead and have these environments when people do and feel what they want to do. And the scary part is this. If true, based on the allegations and based on the actions too, Candice Brown does not act like a typical professional. If falsification of stuff is not typical, and asking law enforcement not to basically mind their business and don't do shit, don't do anything in the shelter to protect residents and staff. So then when you have those types of alleged environments, then you're going to have a scenario wherein why is that transpiring? That possibly be transpiring because, hey, look, if you're a drug dealer and engage in illegal activity, you don't want someone snooping all over the place and doing their job. You don't want to make enemies of the very clients that you will stand to make money from. I'm offering that as a possible motive, even though you really need to investigate to see what is actually transpiring there. And that's what's being asked for, a thorough investigation of the district attorney's office. That's why this is being sent to the district attorney's office for an investigation, period. I mean, it's just the evidence that we received so far is not conducive to support the false allegation made by Candice Brown and or merit the dismissal of the employee Orlando McLean. That's the conclusion, that based on what we've gotten so far, which they have had access to, they being county attorney and upper administration and HR had access to and could have asked for, but it just keeps on going. And so I'm going to go ahead and submit this to y'all. Whether or not you review it is up to y'all, but it's here. God bless. Thank you. And it's real sad, dude. It's real sad. This dude jacked up from the beginning, and the evidence just supports his claims that there really wasn't, nothing really transpired based on the viewpoint of multiple employees. So you take a mountain, make a molehill, like what do you call it? Sent an email out recently about a car being parked in the back lot. As soon as I send an email out, Frank then immediately contacts the cook's employer, and his supervisor says to him, the cook comes to the front to argue with Teresa about, hey, look, why am I not allowed to park in the back no more? When Teresa was targeted months before for parking in the back, here this same dude was doing the same thing. And it takes an email from me for Frank to even send an email out to go ahead and address it. That's a prejudice issue. That's impunity. That's everything. God bless. Take care. Hope you consider this report and the evidence herein